My message is to speak up. When you see injustice happening in front of you, whether it's in person or online, we should feel it's our duty to support the oppressed and shut it down.
This is a podcast called Walk, Talk, Listen. An attempt to connect people and make this world a bit better by sharing opinions and experiences based on the belief that everyone's perspective is true, albeit partial. My name is Maurice Blom, and I would like to welcome you to yet another episode of Walk, Talk, Listen. Good day, everybody. This is another episode of the podcast Walk, Talk, Listen. And as always, I'm delighted with today's guest who will introduce herself. Wardah, please go ahead.
Thanks, Maurice, for having me. It's good to be here with you all. So my name is Wardah Khalid. I wear a lot of different hats. I'm a policy advisor, activist, career coach, speaker, and nonprofit founder. And I'm really passionate about improving international affairs and uplifting marginalized communities to step into their power. So my background is in refugees, foreign policy, civic engagement, and accounting as well.
Mm-hmm. And tell us, when did that happen? That passion for working in this, in all these areas. Was there a moment in your life where you thought, okay, this is what I'm going to do, or?
It kind of built up gradually. I didn't really know, I think as a kid, what I wanted to do. I was thinking about maybe being a teacher. But I really enjoyed my high school government class. That was my favorite class, my government AP class. And I thought, wow, it would be so cool to go to DC and work in policy. And I think around that time, Madeleine Albright was Secretary of State, which I thought was really cool because she was a woman. And so it just kind of put a little nugget in my head of wanting to perhaps work at the UN or be in DC. But I didn't really know how to get there. So I ended up pursuing accounting in graduate school, got my CPA license, and practiced as a corporate tax accountant before switching over. And the way I got into international affairs and politics was through civic engagement, which I participated in while I was living in Houston. So I was a religion blogger for the Houston Chronicle, where I kind of wrote about my experiences growing up as a Muslim in Texas. There was a lot of Islamophobia at the time. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were happening, and President Obama was also facing a lot of heat for potentially being a Muslim or an Arab, as if that was a bad thing. So all of these things combined helped me realize that, I wanted to move this passion that I had for, redefining the narrative of our community, redefining my own narrative, and working to secure the rights of marginalized people in the US and abroad. And so that helped me make the transition over to international affairs and civil rights and civic engagement. And so it kind of just built from there.
Wow. And what I'm interested in to understand, Wardah, is that, unfortunately, many like you, but experiencing, discrimination and saw that happening on television and media, etc. But not all of them would start writing in blogs about it. So did you have an example there of a person that you inspired to start doing that, or was it all, by your own, okay, I feel that I need to do this?
So writing for me is a very kind of therapeutic process and allows me to really get down my thoughts in a very clear way and kind of get it out of my system, what I'm feeling. So I actually began writing in high school. I was on the newspaper staff my senior year of high school. And then I continued writing in college. I was a news writer for one semester and then an opinion columnist for 3 years. And I loved opinion writing because it was a way to put my perspective out there for everybody to read. And then they could tell me if they agreed with it or disagreed with it, which was also kind of fun to hear. So when I graduated from college, and that was around the time Islamophobia started ramping up and President Obama had gotten elected, it was my way. It was like, okay, I have this writing skill and I see that the Houston Chronicle, which is, the fourth largest city in America, has this religion blog where they seem to let everyday people write. How can I, continue my writing, but now focus more on a faith perspective based on my own experience? Because it really seems like people don't understand or don't know what the real experience of American Muslims are. They just hear what they hear on the news or in the media or by politicians and pundits. And how can I bridge that gap that people seemingly have created between Islam and America, which I was living both worlds. So I didn't see any difference in that. And so it was a way of redefining the narrative and also empowering myself and hopefully others to recognize what they read in that blog and feel proud of their identity.
You worked for a couple of NGOs, right? And then a few years ago, you started your own. So tell us about that. How did that happen and why? And what is your organization trying to do?
Yeah, so when I first got to DC, I started working at this Quaker lobby called the Friends Committee on National Legislation. And I was I was doing Middle East policy there. And I really loved how they utilized their faith values to try to make the world a better place, specifically through policy and congressional policy, although they also worked with the White House as well. And even before I started working there, I remember researching them on their website and learning more about them because I was doing a fellowship. So I got to choose or decide between which organizations I wanted to work with. And the reason why I really liked them was because they seemed to have similar faith values as me, but also they were utilizing it to be very active and to make the world a better place. They had been doing lobbying, I think, for like 70 years or so. And so they were well established. They were doing it through their churches, which they call meeting houses. And they were having a significant impact. They were well known on Capitol Hill, and people knew they were pacifists and that they were trying to create peace and harmony. So I loved that idea, and I wanted to bring it to my own community because the Quakers are less than 70,000 people in the US, but they have immense lobbying power and educational power on Capitol Hill. And I was thinking, why does my community of 3 to 8 million people in the US not have that same power? We need to get organized and tap into that. So that's really what Poligon does. I did kind of the groundwork, I did a lot of research about why such an organization hadn't been created in the first place, and then put a team of people together to help bring that vision to life. And we really focus on 3 things: training, education, and direct advocacy on the Hill that we can do as part of a 501c3. And it's been great. We are now in our 5th, 6th year. We launched in January of 2017, and we just brought on our first full-time executive director, which is a really exciting step for us. And hopefully this means we can continue to grow. We've trained over 11,000 people in the US and across the world on how to advocate with your member of Congress, whether it's through a phone call, a town hall meeting, or an office visit, and provided a lot of really helpful educational resources for the community. So I'm really excited to see how far it goes. And hopefully it becomes very natural for our community to not only vote, which we're getting really good at, but also how to hold your member of Congress or your elected official accountable after you vote for them at the ballot box.
And I just want to make sure that I will put a link to the website of your organization in the podcast notes. But maybe it's good to repeat it here to make sure that people get it. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's called Poligon, which is spelled Poligon, like the shape. And the website is poligonnational.org. You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Poligon National. And the Facebook page is facebook.com/Poligon Education Fund.
Is it your organization? Is it focused only on the Muslim population, or is it going beyond that? Can anybody join?
The tagline is, it's Muslims and allies. So I think our first or second training that we did was not for a Muslim group. It was kind of a group of young people that were from Maryland of all different faith backgrounds. And we've also done it with professional groups. So while we focus on the Muslim community, it's open to anybody to participate in the trainings and sign up for the mailing list and get educated. We have a great newsletter that goes out on Friday that is called Hill Happenings, and it tells people very briefly what happened that week on Capitol Hill. And I think anybody of any community can benefit from that kind of information.
Right. Hey, and well, you're so active. You're doing so many different things, but this organization is not the only thing you do. Can you maybe share a little bit, what else you do?
So my day job is I currently work at the Department of Health and Human Services at the Office of Refugee Resettlement. And I've been there for a little over a year, and I work on Afghan family reunification. It's been really, really fulfilling work, and I get to work with Church World Service and all these other organizations that are in the refugee space, as well as the State Department, Congress. So it's been a nice amalgamation of kind of all of the different things that I've done in my career. But aside from that, I still do some consulting work. I work with the Islamic Scholarship Fund and help institutionalize their congressional internship and fellowship program to place Muslim fellows and interns on Capitol Hill, which is really, really important in increasing representation and diversity on Capitol Hill. And that will hopefully lead to better policymaking. And then I also do career coaching. This is something that I'm very passionate about, especially uplifting marginalized communities who maybe don't know how to achieve the goals that they've set for themselves. Many of us are children of immigrants. And so these career paths, even the one that I'm pursuing now, I had to figure it out on my own. I had nobody to help me or tell me how to do it, what my resume needed to look like, what kind of education did I need to have. So I love providing career coaching, and I do workshops on media trainings and networking and salary negotiation to try to help people really be their best and obtain their best and do their best with education. So I do that, and then I'll do other speaking engagements as well. And we met each other most recently where I was an MC at a refugee banquet. So keeping very busy, but I love all the different things that I do. And I think that I'm a pretty creative person when it comes to my interests and how I want to make a difference in the world. So I'm just really enjoying doing all that.
I had to laugh, but I was listening to you because I was thought, do you have, maybe share your secrets and how that you discovered that there are more hours in a day than 24?
Very efficient time management skills.
Yeah.
And it really forces you to prioritize when you're doing a lot of things. You can't spend forever doing one thing because you've got other things that you want to get to too. But I also have really been intentional about balance, especially in these past couple of years. Even prior to COVID, right before COVID, I was really getting intentional about it because I was so aware of burnout. And the one good thing about starting my career in corporate is we always heard the term work-life balance, even while we were in school. And so I was very aware of that, hey, if I was working a lot, and I did have times at Deloitte where I was working a lot, but as long as most of the time I had a balanced schedule and I could do other things that I really enjoyed outside of work, then that was a good thing. So I've always kind of had that mentality where yes, there's always endless work to do, but at what point are you sacrificing your health? And you're not going to have any joy out of what you're doing either. So it's all about balance, and it's still a work in progress. But yeah, I'm making it work. And as long as I'm enjoying it, I'm happy.
Talking about, finding a good balance, walking helps me. And a couple of years ago, I started to do a 100-mile walk. So it means, 15 to 20 miles per day to reach that 100-mile. And I did that to raise awareness about ending hunger, poverty, and injustice. Also raise some money. And the reason that I started this podcast is because when COVID happened, I was not able to be joined by other people. So I thought, okay, maybe I can walk virtually with folks. I'm walking virtually today with you. If you would be asked to walk 100 miles in a week for a cause, for which cause would that be and why?
So I would say anything justice related. Justice is really what drives me. It's a big part of my faith. Religion or Islam is all about justice. And so whether that's spiritual justice or physical justice, that really is what would compel me to walk. There's a verse in the Quran. This is in chapter 4, which is Surah Nisa, which says, "Stand up firmly for justice as a witness to God, even against yourselves or your parents or your kin, whether it be against rich or poor." So that just shows how important it is in my faith. So and there's so many different causes that can follow with injustice, right? Whether that's Black Lives Matter or poverty or Islamophobia or any of those causes, any place that there is an injustice, that is really what compels me to take action, and in this case, walk.
Right. When I walk with my guests, and you start talking about life. I mean, it's because basically after a couple of miles, often is one reason why you're doing this, because it's really tiresome. But then we'd also talk about religion, spirituality, because there is something walking with that as well, something that's difficult to get to. I mean, in terms of walking in life, etc., etc. But then when we talk about spirituality and religion, we often talk about what's happening with the youth. Are they experiencing religion differently? I think especially in the Christian churches, you see the number of younger generation going down. Does that mean that they are less religious, or they are less religious, but they're still spiritual? Anyway, my question to you is, what do you see among youth in your community happening around religion and spirituality? Is that the same, different? Can you share some observations from your side?
Yeah, it's a mixed bag, I would say. I think that maybe in earlier generations, religion in the US, or at least Muslims in the US, were very focused on kind of like, let's break bread with others and let's have kind of interfaith gatherings to get to know each other. And that's important. And I did that too when I was a religion blogger in Houston. But what I'm noticing is young people are kind of moving beyond that now. They're moving now to like, what can we actually accomplish together based on our shared values, versus just moving from tolerance to friendship to understanding. What can we actually do together? So I'm seeing a lot of young people get really involved in civic engagement and advocacy with their faith communities or with other faith communities. I was a Muslim working at a Quaker lobby. I still see other Muslims that show up to their Hill days because, there's not a Muslim lobby yet that they can advocate with all the time. But also because they have aligned faith values. So I think that that's a really inspiring thing that's happening, because we are stronger together in the US, because we are such different people from different backgrounds, but we can get together on one thing. But at the same time, I also kind of relate to what you're talking about, where there are some young people who seem to be having sort of like an identity crisis because of the pressures of quote unquote Western values, or the urge to kind of conform and blend in with the American population in general. But then I also see young people that are wearing their identities very proudly and are so confident, way more confident than I was as a kid, where there's, Muslim hijabi TikTok stars and Olympic athletes and tech geniuses and activists. And it's very inspiring, and it's growing. So I'm hopeful that people feel strong in their identity, but there's no one size fits all for youth, for sure.
Wow, I mean, from you to hear that they were more fearless than you were, I mean, it's like they must be superheroes. Okay, that's great. Hey, and what I wanted to ask you, because somebody sent me an article, I think it was published recently in NPR, mentioning that because especially the younger generation, but not only, we're not interested anymore in the church, but we're still interested in more the action related with values. Some churches really abolished the church and started to have working on home gardens where, they meet and yes, they might have a prayer, but then they go into action. Is that something that you're seeing as well on the within the Muslim community, or is this more a Christian development?
No, I think you're right. I mean, I'm thinking right now about my sister. She volunteers at the local mosque, and they just had this Sisters Hot Cocoa social activity where I'm sure they had some sort of religious talk as part of it, but it was really just about getting together and like building community bonds. And they have like bake sales that they do, and they do other youth kind of activities that they can work together for the community. And so I think it is a trend in our community as well. There's definitely tons of religious material out there if you want to look for it, whether it's going to the prayers in the mosque or Friday prayer where there's a sermon, or taking an Islamic class on the weekends or something. But then for people who are more action oriented and want to do things, there's that for them too. And I hope that more mosques and Islamic community centers create these youth groups and young professional groups to get them more active in their community, while they can also have this background of the religion that kind of ties everybody together and reminds them of why they're doing what they do. So it's definitely evolved a long way, I think, since I was a kid. And even when I was young, we didn't have, I didn't know of any Muslim youth camps or anything like that, where now they're so active. And later, after I graduated from college, I became a camp counselor for them when they finally started those programs back up. And it was really fun for me. And then now I see that same organization doing kind of get out the vote, emails and mobilizing young people that way. And I spoke at one of their conferences. So it's really cool how they're tying the two together.
Yeah, I actually, I'm overall and absolutely positive, but there are also things that I worry about. Are there things that you worry about? And if so, what are those?
Yeah, so when it comes to Islam in America, I definitely still worry about the same issues that kind of propelled me on this path, which is Islamophobia and how it's still not being taken seriously in many areas, whether it's by pundits or politicians that can say whatever they want about Islam and Muslims and it doesn't matter what the consequences are, or whether it's, maybe the government not prioritizing it, whether it's, the White House or other government bodies, making sure that we're tracking Islamophobia and really paying attention to it. Or, Hollywood that keeps coming out with movies that have Islamophobic themes. I think American Sniper is one of them. I haven't watched it, but what I read on Twitter is when people would come out of the theater, they were like, oh, I want to shoot an Arab or I want to shoot a Muslim. It was a game for them that this movie apparently perpetuated. So that kind of stuff really worries me. And it's not just this anecdotal evidence. There is hard research that shows that Islamophobia is still rising. And we really saw that happen, as I mentioned, after Obama was elected, and then also during the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and then most recently with the Trump administration. So there was a survey that Muslim Community Network, which is this nonprofit out in New York, did in 2022, showing that out of the 200 people that they surveyed, Muslims that they surveyed, nearly half of them had been victims of a hate crime. So it's so still prevalent. And, these are just people that are reporting it. There's probably many people who are not or didn't even fill out the survey. They also said that 43% of Muslims between 10 and 18 years old reported experiencing or witnessing a hate crime back in 2019. And over 75% of the Muslims that they surveyed reported witnessing a hate crime. So it's very prevalent out there. And I'm just worried that it's not being paid attention to enough. And so I'm hoping with this increase in political engagement and redefining our narrative in the media and really organizing together with other faith communities that we can start to overcome this. I mean, we have started to overcome it, but even move further. And that, organizations like my nonprofit Poligon are teaching people how to hold the representatives accountable. So they can't pass these sorts of policies that vilify Muslims or say these things in a public sphere anymore. It's about holding people accountable and then I talked about Gen Z also giving hope in that, where they're out there voting and organizing. So I'm hopeful, but it's also worrying to see that this is still happening.
A little bit continuing on the worry there. What are some of the things that are also happening that continue to give you hope? Can you give some concrete examples?
Yeah, I mean, there are ways that we've seen faith communities come together to counter Islamophobia, and I've loved that. Sometimes when there are hate crimes or attack on a mosque, a lot of times it's the churches or the synagogues that come and show solidarity, which is really important because our community does the same when there's a church or synagogue attacked, because, religious bigotry does not care which religion it is, they'll go after any religion. So that really gives me hope of seeing the interfaith community come together. And I think that is a result of all the bridge building that we've done over the past many, many decades, especially after 9/11. There was a lot of people that thankfully came together after that to show that, hey, Islam is not the issue here, it's not the problem, and we really value our Muslim neighbors. So that the interfaith work really inspires me, seeing initiatives by, whether it's state, local, or city government, whether it's like resolutions passing, honoring, today is like a Muslim day or Islam day, or they'll do a Muhammad Ali day or something where they're honoring some sort of personality or the religion, and then seeing like Eid really celebrated, which is the holiday that we celebrate after Ramadan, and then after the Hajj, and people sharing their stories in schools, like moms reading Islamic books to the kids to teach about their faith traditions. So there's a lot of work being done at the local level, which is really exciting and inspiring, and hopefully combating this. But it's definitely an uphill battle that I think is going to take quite a bit more time.
If you look at the NGO sector as a whole, how do you think? And I know it's difficult to, if not impossible, to kind of talk about the whole sector because it's a very diverse sector. But if you look at, I'm going to ask the question anyway. So if you look at the NGO sector as a whole, how do you think that NGO sector did in terms of, fighting racial injustice, and what did it do well and what it should do better? Can you share some thoughts?
Yeah, I think it was a mixed bag, like many other sectors. There were some things that were positive, some things that could be improved on. And like you mentioned, with the George Floyd murder, Black Lives Matter was a huge, very public wake-up call for a lot of sectors. And they put out statements and pledges, which is great, but actions talk, right? So one question that a lot of activists were asking, including myself after Black Lives Matter and all these statements came out, was, who sits on your board? Do you have a diverse board that is leading your organization? Who are you hiring? What is the diversity of the staff that you're hiring? You can make statements and pledges, but if your actual organization doesn't reflect the diversity, then you are part of the problem. You're not helping in creating a solution. So I think that was one thing that I noticed a lot about not only the NGO sector, but also the corporate sector and others that actually have more resources often than NGOs. All of there are some very large NGOs that have a lot of resources and can make that sort of change. I saw a lot of, diversity, equity, and inclusion training, which sometimes it was good in organizations and taken seriously and actually implemented, while other times it was just kind of a check the box thing where it's like, okay, yeah, we have a DEI officer, or we all went through a training, we're all good now. And I think it takes a lot of courage to have people at your organization take racial bias trainings and really look internally and do the work to see, hey, what do people here at the organization think? What are we doing to improve the situation? And it also showed that everything is kind of interconnected, right? So racial injustice is tied to other forms of injustice, and we all play a role in either alleviating it or perpetuating it. And so I think it made people I hope it made people take a hard look at themselves and see what they could do better. But there's obviously still a lot of work to be done because it's not gone, right? It's still very much there. And we still see stories almost every day of racial injustice or xenophobia or bigotry. And so we have a long way to go, but it's, like I said, actions talk. It's good that people made statements and are doing words, but actions really matter.
Yeah. And when I was listening to you, I was thinking, maybe another way of saying is, some of those actions were working on certain symptoms, but we really need to look at the root causes. And for me, what is that as a world, we identified the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think, those goals are not perfect, but at least it's an attempt to look at the root causes of the issues. So I have a question to you about the Sustainable Development Goals. Would you like the listeners to know about the Sustainable Development Goals? So that's my first part of the question. And the second part is, we haven't made a lot of progress on the Sustainable Development Goals. We are not on the right track, especially the last 2 years. We have kind of, we are at a standstill. And some people have been saying, well, one of the reasons that we are not on the right track is that we did not properly pay attention to the ability, skills, and knowledge that you need as individual and as community to work on these Sustainable Development Goals. And therefore, they developed the inner development goals. So there are 5 inner development goals: being, thinking, relating, collaborating, and action. So the second part of my question is, any thoughts on those inner development goals? So two parts. One is, what do you like them to know about the SDGs?
Yeah. So for the SDGs, I actually first got exposed to them when I was in grad school living in New York, and I interned at the OIC mission. And I was tracking how member states, the OIC mission is the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. So it's a lot of the Muslim majority states in the world, or the countries in the world. And we were tracking how well they were doing on achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Because I think at that time, it was by 2015, I think was the deadline that they were supposed to reach it. And now I saw that it's 2030. And like you said, a lot of the countries are not meeting them yet. And the goals are things that, for me personally, when I look at them, I think of them as basic human rights, having clean drinking water and having safety and, having proper access to nutrition. These are things should be basic human rights, but they're not, hence the need for the goals. And that's not the reality of the situation on the ground. And, it's a very complex reasoning why things are the way they are, right? You've got maybe corrupt governments or lack of natural resources, or as you mentioned, a pandemic, or crop failures or things that are stopping issues. But I still think it's worth having them because it's a goal to aspire to. And you can't make progress unless you know what you're making progress toward, right? So it's a goal to aspire to. But I think it will require perhaps more cooperation between countries and member states of the United Nations, because maybe a country can't achieve all the goals on their own and they need some resource assistance. And so I hope that there's more collaboration in the future. But having said that, we're all work in progress. There is poverty and hunger in the US as well. So it's not like we can say that, we're perfect or anything like that. As far as the inner development goals, I actually hadn't heard about this. But I looked it up, and I think it makes a lot of sense, and it's very much needed because personal development is so critical to improving societies and to functioning as better human beings, right? But unless you have those basic human needs met, which we were talking about, for instance, in the Sustainable Development Goals, you can't really focus on that, right? It's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where you have to have your basic human needs fulfilled first: water, food, shelter, safety, and then you can work on personal development. And personal development is a passion of mine. Obviously, I'm a career coach, and then I also have done like my own personal emotional intelligence trainings and things like that to try to become the best version of myself. So I think it's really inspiring for having a movement called Inner Development Goals to do that, because I think it can only help improve our society.
What I hope I will be able to achieve with this podcast is to connect people, because I really think, if you are able to connect people, they may be starting a conversation, and a conversation is a first necessary step in dialogue, and then ultimately, more understanding, hopefully peace. Therefore, I'm going to connect you with my previous guest who had a question for you.
My question would be, what are some of the spiritual practices? Maybe it's walking 100 miles, but what are some of the spiritual practices that they have found to be the most regenerative and the most transformational for their own kind of life and activism and vocational pursuits?
My answer to that is taking faith-inspired action. So that's kind of been a running theme in my career journey and personal life. So whether it was writing my religion blog or participating in interfaith dialogue dinners or working at faith-based NGOs that aligned with my values or starting my own NGO, these all channeled my faith in a very active and community-oriented way that I find very, very energizing. I'm very much an activist. I like doing things. I will talk and I will write as needed to communicate, but I really like to be on the ground, walking or doing these different activities to to be able to accomplish these things. And so that's very much a spiritual practice for me, is spirituality in action.
And what is your question for the next guest?
So my question is, what advice would you give to your younger self when it comes to these topics, whether it's spiritual practices or thinking about community or the world around you? What advice would you give to your younger self, knowing what you know now of the state of the world?
Cool question. Hey, music is very important to me, not only listening, but trying to make some music myself as well. So a question that I always ask to my guests is, if I ask you to come up with a piece of music or a song that best embodies what you are about, which song or piece of music would that be and why?
So one song that I really like is called A Million Dreams from The Greatest Showman. It's a movie. I'm sure you heard it. It's a very popular song, but it talks about having a million dreams. And I feel like I'm very much a dreamer because I am an optimist. I'm a realistic optimist, but I am an optimist, and I dream of a world where the Middle East and Muslim majority countries are viewed from a human rather than a military lens, where refugees and immigrants are welcomed without prejudice, and where our democracy actually functions as one where every single person has a voice and a vote that is heard, and where every American and person around the world is treated with justice, equality, and dignity, regardless of their background. And obviously right now, this is not a reality for everybody. And so that's why it's still a dream. And I have the courage to dream and hope to achieve that. And you can't achieve without dreaming. So I think this song very much represents how I feel about the importance of dreams, and dreams that actually do keep me up at night and that I'm excited about.
Yeah, and we will add that to a Spotify playlist that we created.
Nice.
With all the songs that were picked by the guest. And then you really should check it out. It's really, I think it's a lot of fun. Yeah. It's hard rock, reggae, classical music, and now your song will be added as well as soon as.
It's like a show tune.
yeah. But it's interesting. I like listening to it because it brings me back to the conversations that I had, which they've been great for me. Yeah, I've been so privileged with, that I was able to talk with so many different people with different backgrounds, different countries and stuff. So, if you go to Spotify and you search for hashtag Walk Talk Listen,
Okay.
You should be able to find that playlist. There is also a link in the podcast notes to that particular list.
Great. I'll check it out.
You know, the last 2 years, a lot has happened, and that's especially, but not only, but especially also due to COVID. What can you tell about what did that do to your organization, and what are some of the? And it's not over yet, unfortunately, but you know, are there lessons from experiencing that, and can you share those?
So for Poligon, it was barely a shift for us because we were already 100% remote. And I thought that was really fortunate for us because we didn't have to worry about office space or going into the office or anything like that. And I think that it really showed us that remote work is the future, and we were already in the future incidentally and not on purpose, but it was very cool. So we did shift our trainings to online, obviously, versus in-person trainings. But it also allowed us to reach a lot more people that we maybe normally wouldn't if we were flying to all these different locations. So the future is definitely virtual. And that was something that was kind of confirmed by the COVID pandemic. And, you know, for me personally, doing my kind of career coaching and consulting work, I started a lot of that during COVID because now I had this opportunity to, you know, not have to like meet with people and travel. I could just turn on my Zoom and meet with people around the country or around the world and help them online, which was really cool because before we normally take meetings and coffees in person, and now it was just, you had access to a lot more people and more quickly through this online kind of platform. So that was really exciting. And then also, you know, I started several positions just fully remote. I was consulting at Rethink Media, doing around 9/11 work. The 20th anniversary of 9/11 was coming up. That was a fully remote position I started. I started my job at HHS remote as well. We didn't go into the office till probably 6 months into my position. And even now we go twice a week. So it's more of a hybrid structure. So I think it just shows that there's a lot of unknowns in life. You think that you know how life is going to turn out and how it's going to be, but that's not how it is at all. And the people that do the best are the ones that are flexible and they roll with the punches, and they strive to see the opportunity and the bright side in things. And so I think that with pandemic, a lot of us moved online and got connected that way. And I started creating these coaching reels on Instagram to teach people quick lessons and mini videos about careers and how they could succeed. And I think pandemic was part of the push that I needed to do that I had been thinking about. And it gave me kind of a built-in audience that was looking for content like that because everybody had moved online. So I think it was an exciting time. It was a time of change, but it also had some great things that came along with it. And then also a lot of lessons learned and being more cautious about safety and health while we're doing all this.
Yeah, where will you go from here? I mean, you're doing so many things, but where is Wardah 5 to 10 years from now?
So I'm very open to where I will be 5 to 10 years from now. Ideally, I would still be working in policy and making an impact. That's really my goal, is whatever place I need to be in order to make an impact and improve the world for the better is where I'll be happy. And I think it's important to have goals that are flexible like that, because sometimes people don't really know what they want, or they get stuck on like, okay, I have to go to this particular organization or this particular career path, and they get stuck and really disheartened when it doesn't work out. I've had so many failures that have happened in my career trajectory that I thought this is where I needed to be, and that's not where I ended up. And sometimes there's unplanned opportunities that you take and they become the best thing. I never thought I was going to work in refugee resettlement work, and I ended up at Church World Service because while I was in grad school, I had helped start this nonprofit called I Am Your Protector, which uplifted stories about people unlike themselves. Again, it was an interfaith kind of thing. It was a Jewish woman that had started it. And they focused a lot on refugee stories and refugees protecting others. And the media work, again, that I volunteered and did on my own based on the media work I had taught myself with religion blogging and speaking. And that's how I ended up as a media relations manager at Church World Service. And I'm so glad I did that job. And that job helped me get my current job at Health and Human Services doing Afghan family reunification. So I'm always very cognizant about being open. And as long as I can accomplish my mission in life, which is to make the world a better place and impact the world, and particularly if I can help vulnerable populations, I'll be happy. So I hope to be in a position of leadership somewhere, continuing doing policy and still doing, all my fun stuff on the side, career coaching and consulting and speaking, whatever I have capacity for at that point in my life. And yeah, I'll other dreams as well, obviously. But you gotta be flexible. I think I'll still be in the DMV. I really like being there.
Great. Hey, these conversations always go fast. So my last question for you is, do you have any last question, message, a request, for the listeners?
Yeah, my message is to speak up. When you see injustice happening in front of you, whether it's in person or online, we should feel it's our duty to support the oppressed and shut it down. It's not only the right thing to do, but it's actually dangerous not to do anything, because tomorrow it could be you in that situation. So, and it's just important that we speak up. I think that especially when we are part of communities that have more access to people, or maybe you'll have somebody will listen to you because you are similar to them. We should all recognize our privilege and speak up when we can to fight injustice, because it's a community effort and it's not fair to only have certain activists doing it. Everybody in their own sphere of influence, whether it's their neighborhood or their church or their school or their mosque or their, homeowners association or wherever it is that they live, that is an opportunity to stand for justice when it's time to do so. So don't underestimate the ability you have to impact change. You don't have to be in DC or New York working at these big organizations or the government to do so. You can definitely do it in your own sphere of influence. So make sure you speak up.
Well, thank you so much for your willingness to talk with me today, and thanks for sharing your wisdom. Thank you for who you are. Unbelievable, all the things that you do. Continue doing them, but make sure you keep the right balance. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a pleasure. And thank you for your podcast and all of the great conversations that you're having and sharing with the world. So thank you.
Thank you. This episode was made possible by the support of an organization called CWS. You want to be part of a movement? Well, sign up to become a sustaining partner. As a sustaining partner, you can make a difference in the world, automatically every month. Sustaining partners commit to a hopeful future by making compassion a part of their monthly budget. It could mean new systems to manage precious resources like water, or diversified ways of earning a living that make people more resilient. For as little as $10 a month, you can transform lives. You want to check it out? Well, go to cwsglobal.org/sustain. Thank you for listening to Walk, Talk, Listen. Please check us out on 100mile.org or follow us on Facebook or Instagram.